The silence that fell over the saloon was so abrupt, it seemed to suck all the air from the room as Abel Zimmerman slammed his fist on the table, rattling the empty whiskey glasses and making his declaration. $20 for the girl, my own daughter. Fine breeding stock and not completely useless in the kitchen neither. His bloodshot eyes swept over the crowd of rough men, seeking takers while 16-year-old Abigail Zimmerman stood trembling beside him, eyes downcast, cheeks burning with humiliation. The year was 1875, and Dry Creek, Colorado was barely more than a collection of weathered buildings surrounded by vast, unforgiving wilderness. The gold rush had long since passed this town by, leaving behind only those too stubborn or too broken to leave. Abel Zimmerman counted among the latter, a man consumed by drink and desperation since his wife's death 2 years prior. Abigail clutched the frayed edges of her shawl, praying that this nightmare would end. Her father had threatened this for weeks, but tonight, with gambling debts piling higher than the mountains surrounding their valley and whiskey burning through his veins, he had finally made good on his promise. Her honey blonde hair fell in waves around her face as she tried to disappear into herself, knowing there was nowhere to run. 25, called a voice from the back, belonging to Silas Jenkins, a man known for his mean streak and the 3 wives he'd already buried. The craggy-faced miner grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Always wanted me a young'un to keep my bed warm. 30, countered another voice, this one belonging to Bartholomew Reed, the owner of the largest cattle operation this side of the mountains and a man approaching 60, with a reputation for breaking both horses and women. The bids continued, each one driving a deeper stake of terror into Abigail's heart. She risked a glance up, scanning the room for any hint of mercy, any friendly face that might intervene. But these were hard men in a hard country, and mercy was as scarce as rain in August. $50, came a new voice, quiet yet commanding enough to cut through the din. The crowd parted like a curtain to reveal a tall figure standing just inside the saloon doors. The stranger wore a well-worn duster that couldn't quite hide the gunbelt slung low on his hips. His face was partially shadowed by a dark hat, but there was no hiding the set of his jaw or the unyielding look in his eyes. $50, he repeated, stepping forward into the lamplight. His boots made little sound on the rough-hewn floor, yet every man there seemed to hold his breath as he approached. But she's leaving. Abigail looked up fully now, meeting the stranger's gaze for the first time. His eyes were the color of a summer sky, clear and sharp, set in a face that had seen its share of sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 25, but there was something in his bearing that suggested he'd lived several lifetimes already. Name's Owen O'Malley, he said, addressing not Abel but Abigail herself. And I believe this transaction is over. Abel sputtered, whiskey and indignation coloring his face a dangerous shade of red. Now see here, Cowboy, I didn't say she was for sale outright. Just offering her services, if you catch my meaning. Owen's expression didn't change, but his hand drifted slightly closer to his holster. I understood perfectly, $50. She walks out that door and you never see her again, those are my terms. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension. Abigail felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild thing seeking escape. She's my daughter, Abel protested, though with less conviction now that he was facing Owen's steady gaze. Not anymore. Owen pulled a leather pouch from his pocket and counted out $50 in gold and notes, placing them deliberately on the table. The amount represented more than 2 months' wages for most men in the territory. Consider this a fair price for your poor excuse of fatherhood. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced when Abel rose unsteadily to his feet. Who the hell do you think you are? Abel's hand moved toward the ancient pistol tucked into his waistband, a motion that sobered him enough to hesitate when Owen's hand flashed to his own weapon, not drawing but making it clear he could and would if necessary. I'm the man paying you $50 to walk away, Owen said evenly. Take it or leave it, but either way, she's not staying here. Abigail held her breath, watching her father's face as he wrestled with pride, greed, and drunken anger. Finally, with a curse that made even the hardened miners wince, Abel snatched the money from the table. Take her then, he growled. Ungrateful baggage anyway, her mother's spawned through and through nothing but trouble since the day she was born. Owen turned to Abigail, his expression softening just a fraction. "Miss, do you have anything you wish to gather before we leave this place?" Finding her voice at last, though it emerged as little more than a whisper, Abigail nodded. "A small trunk, at my father's cabin." "We'll retrieve it," Owen promised, then addressed the barkeep. "Theo, I'm trusting you to keep Mr. Zimmerman occupied for the next hour." "Whatever he wants to drink on my tab." The barkeep nodded, already reaching for a fresh bottle. Owen extended his arm to Abigail. "Shall we?" With one last look at the father who had just sold her to a stranger, Abigail placed her trembling hand on Owen's offered arm. As they walked toward the door, she realized she knew nothing about this man except his name, and that he had just spent a small fortune to prevent her from falling into worse hands. "Why?" she asked once they were outside, the crisp night air cooling her flushed face. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Owen looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "Let's get your belongings first, then we can talk about what happens next." The walk to the cabin she'd shared with her father was mercifully short. Inside, Abigail quickly gathered her few possessions. 2 dresses, a comb that had belonged to her mother, a small Bible, and a faded daguerreotype of her parents in happier times. Everything fit into a trunk so small Owen lifted it with one hand. "Is that everything?" he asked, surveying the sparse cabin. Abigail nodded, feeling suddenly defensive. "We haven't had much since Mother died. Father's mining claim never produced as he hoped." "I wasn't judging," Owen said gently, "just making sure we didn't leave anything important behind." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "Miss Zimmerman, I want to be clear about something. I didn't buy you tonight. I paid your father to let you go. You're free to make your own decisions now." Abigail stared at him, uncomprehending. "Free, but where would I go?" "I have no family, no money. I have a small ranch about a day's ride from here. You can stay there until you decide what you want to do. I have a spare room, and I give you my word you'll be safe." "Why would you help me like this? You don't know me." Owen's expression darkened momentarily. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to young women with no protection in territories like this. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, not if I could prevent it." There was a story there, Abigail sensed, but now wasn't the time to press for details. Instead, she asked the practical question. "And what will you expect from me in return?" Owen shook his head firmly. "Nothing you're not willing to give freely. You can help with chores if you want to earn your keep, but that's entirely your choice. As I said, you're free now, freedom." The word seemed foreign to Abigail, who had gone from being her father's daughter to nearly becoming some man's property in the span of a single evening. She wasn't sure she even understood what freedom meant anymore. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything right now. Let's just get you somewhere safe for the night and you can think about everything in the morning." They left the cabin and walked to the livery stable where Owen's horse, a powerful bay gelding, waited patiently. He secured her trunk behind the saddle and then helped her mount, swinging up behind her with practiced ease. As they rode away from Dry Creek, Abigail couldn't help looking back at the only home she'd ever known. Her mother was buried on the hillside overlooking the town, and for a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm her. "We can come back someday if you want," Owen said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts, "to visit your mother's grave." The simple kindness of his understanding broke something in Abigail, and silent tears began to stream down her face. She didn't try to hide them, and Owen didn't comment, just guided his horse steadily through the darkness toward whatever uncertain future awaited them. The night was clear, a canopy of stars stretching overhead as they rode. Owen directed his horse toward a small line shack he knew was about 2 hours' ride from town, one of several outposts maintained by ranchers for cowboys working the range. "We'll stay here tonight," he explained as they approached the simple structure. "It's too dark to make it all the way to my place safely." The shack was basic but sound 4 walls, a roof, a small stove, and 2 narrow cots. Owen lit the lantern hanging by the door and quickly got a fire going in the stove while Abigail stood uncertainly in the doorway. "You can take whichever cot you prefer," he told her. "I've got some coffee and jerky in my saddlebags, not much of a supper, but it'll keep us going until morning." Abigail moved to help him, grateful for the simple task. As they prepared their meager meal, she studied him surreptitiously. In the lantern light, she could see him more clearly than in the dim saloon. He was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he had this evening. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, and his hands, while strong, moved with unexpected gentleness. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 3 years now," Owen replied, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "It's not much, about 100 head of cattle, a decent stretch of grazing land, and a cabin that doesn't leak too badly when it rains, but it's mine. You sound proud of it." "I am. I worked cattle drives for 7 years to save enough to buy it. Started as a greenham who could barely stay on a horse and ended up as trail boss my last 2 years. He handed her a cup. "What about you? Have you always lived in Dry Creek?" Abigail nodded, wrapping her fingers around the warm metal. "Born and raised. My father came out during the mining boom in '59. Met my mother here. She was a school teacher from Boston who came west for adventure." A sad smile touched her lips. "She always said she found more adventure than she bargained for. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was when she died." Abigail's voice faltered. "Father was never the same after. The drinking got worse and the mine yielded less and less. Eventually, he started gambling to try to make up the difference. And tonight was the inevitable conclusion," Owen said grimly. "I suppose it was." Abigail took a sip of the strong coffee. "He wasn't always like this, you know. When Mother was alive, he was different, kinder." "Grief changes people," Owen acknowledged, "but it doesn't excuse what he tried to do tonight." "No," Abigail agreed softly, "it doesn't." They finished their simple meal in companionable silence. When Abigail yawned, unable to stifle her exhaustion any longer, Owen immediately stood. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Abigail moved toward the cot farthest from the door, then hesitated. "Mr. O'Malley, Owen, please. Owen, I realize I haven't properly thanked you yet. What you did tonight, I don't know how I'll ever repay you." He shook his head firmly. "There's nothing to repay. Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman." "Abigail," she corrected. "If I'm to call you Owen, then you must call me Abigail." A small smile touched his lips. "Abigail, then, good night." She lay down fully clothed, pulling a rough blanket over herself. Despite the day's turmoil and the uncertain future ahead, she felt safer than she had in years. As sleep claimed her, her last conscious thought was that perhaps freedom didn't have to mean being alone. Owen watched as Abigail's breathing deepened into sleep. Then he quietly moved his cot to block the door and placed his gun within easy reach before lying down himself, still fully clothed. He wouldn't truly relax until they were far from Dry Creek. Abel Zimmerman hadn't seemed the type to have second thoughts once the whiskey wore off. But Owen hadn't survived this long by taking unnecessary chances. His last thought before drifting off was that he hadn't expected to return from his supply run to town with a young woman in tow. His solitary existence at the ranch was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to anticipate. Morning came with the soft golden light of dawn filtering through the cabin's single window. Abigail woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until her eyes fell on Owen, already awake and tending the stove. "Good morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "Hope you slept well." Abigail sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could. "Better than I expected, thank you. I've made more coffee, and there's a stream nearby if you want to wash up before we head out." Grateful for his thoughtfulness, Abigail accepted the directions to the stream and a clean handkerchief he offered as a makeshift washcloth. The icy mountain water revived her, and by the time she returned to the cabin, she felt more prepared to face whatever the day might bring. They shared a breakfast of the last of Owen's jerky and hardtack, supplemented with wild berries Owen had gathered while she was at the stream. As they ate, he outlined their journey. "It's about 8 hours to my place if we keep a steady pace," he explained. "The trail's decent most of the way, though there's one stretch through a canyon that can be tricky." "I'm not much of a rider," Abigail confessed. "Father never saw the need for me to learn. You'll be fine. Samson here is steady as they come," Owen patted his horse's neck affectionately, "and you'll ride with me so you don't have to worry about controlling him." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, the morning air still crisp with the remnants of night. Abigail sat in front of Owen in the saddle, initially tense and uncomfortable with the unfamiliar closeness. But as the miles passed and the horse's rhythmic gait lulled her, she gradually relaxed. The landscape unfolded before them, vast stretches of prairie grass giving way to pine-covered slopes, all under an endless blue sky. For Abigail, who had rarely ventured beyond the confines of Dry Creek, the immensity of it was both terrifying and exhilarating. "It's beautiful," she murmured as they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. "That it is," Owen agreed. "That's what kept me out here after the war. Couldn't stomach going back east where everything feels closed in. Out here a person can breathe." "You fought in the war?" Abigail asked, turning slightly to see his face. A shadow passed over Owen's features. "Last 2 years of it. Joined up in '63 when I was 18. Union Army 10th Cavalry." Abigail knew enough about the war to recognize that regiment. "You rode with the Buffalo Soldiers?" Surprise flickered in Owen's eyes. "You know of them?" "My mother made sure I was educated, even out here. She said ignorance was a choice, not a condition of geography." Abigail's voice softened with memory. "She subscribed to newspapers from Denver and even from back east when she could get them. We read about the colored regiments and how bravely they fought." Owen nodded, a newfound respect in his gaze. "They were the finest men I ever served with, taught me everything I know about horsemanship and a good deal about courage besides." "How did you come to join them?" I thought. Abigail hesitated, not wanting to give offense. "You thought they were all Negro soldiers," Owen finished for her. "They were, mostly, but they needed experienced scouts who knew the territories, and I'd spent my youth roaming these parts. Army was desperate enough they didn't much care about keeping the regiments strictly segregated by then." The conversation turned to other topics as they rode, Owen pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his cattle drives. Abigail occasionally offering memories of her mother's teachings or observations about the plants they passed that she recognized from her small garden back in Dry Creek. Around midday, they stopped beside a clear-running creek to rest the horse and eat some fresh provisions Owen had packed that morning. Sitting on a sun-warmed rock, Abigail found herself studying her companion with growing curiosity. He was unlike any man she'd known in Dry Creek, educated despite his frontier upbringing, thoughtful in his speech, and possessed of a quiet confidence that required no bluster. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured as they prepared to resume their journey. Owen looked up from adjusting the saddle. "You can ask, I might not answer." "Fair enough. I was wondering why you've never married. You seem like a man who would make a good husband." The words were out before Abigail could consider how forward they might sound, and she felt heat rush to her cheeks. If Owen was taken aback by the question, he didn't show it. "Almost did once," he said after a moment. "Her name was Charlotte. We met in Denver after the war when I was working as a cattle broker. She was the daughter of a banker I did business with." His tone was carefully neutral, but Abigail sensed the story didn't have a happy ending. "What happened? Influenza happened. Winter of '70 hit the city hard that year." Owen's hands stilled on the saddle strap. "She died 3 days before we were to be married. Her father 2 days after that." "I'm so sorry," Abigail said softly. Owen gave a slight shrug, though the gesture couldn't disguise the old pain in his eyes. "Like I said earlier, grief changes people. For me, it meant leaving the city and starting over somewhere new. Somewhere I could work the land and not have to think too much." Understanding dawned on Abigail. "That's why you bought me out last night, isn't it? You've seen what grief can do to a person." "Partly," Owen acknowledged. "But mostly I did it, because it was the right thing to do. No person should be treated as property, especially not by someone who's supposed to protect them." He offered his hand to help her mount, and this time when his arm encircled her waist to steady her on the horse, Abigail found herself acutely aware of his strength and the surprising gentleness of his touch. The remainder of their journey took them through increasingly rugged country, a narrow canyon where the trail hugged the cliff face, a dense pine forest where shadows dappled the path, and finally into a broad valley cradled by mountains on 3 sides. "There it is," Owen said as they crested the final ridge. "O'Malley Ranch." Below them stretched a modest homestead, a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, several outbuildings, a corral with a few horses, and beyond, the rolling grassland where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand by any measure, but to Abigail, who had spent the last 2 years in a dilapidated miner's shack, it looked like paradise. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. "It's a work in progress," Owen replied, though she could hear the pride in his voice. "Come on, let's get you settled. You must be saddle sore by now." Indeed, Abigail was discovering muscles she never knew she had, all of them protesting the long hours on horseback. By the time they reached the cabin, she was trying not to wince with every step. The cabin's interior was simple but well-ordered: a main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a few shelves filled with books that surprised Abigail, and 2 doors leading to what she presumed were bedrooms. "The room on the right will be yours," Owen told her, carrying her small trunk inside. "It's not much, but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak." He showed her the room: a narrow space with a bed, a small chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Fresh linens were folded on the bed, and a basin and pitcher sat on top of the chest. "This is more than generous," Abigail said, overwhelmed by his hospitality. "I don't know how to thank you properly." "No need," Owen assured her. "The place could use a woman's touch, to be honest. It's been just me and occasionally one of my ranch hands when we're busy with the herd." He gestured around the cabin. "Make yourself at home. I need to check on the livestock and let my foreman know I've returned. I'll be back to fix us some supper in an hour or so." Left alone, Abigail took time to unpack her few belongings and wash away the dust of travel. The dress she changed into was one of only 2 she owned: a simple blue calico that had seen better days, but was at least clean. She brushed out her long hair and braided it, feeling more like herself than she had since the nightmare in the saloon. Curious about her new temporary home, she explored the cabin. Owen's bookshelves revealed an eclectic collection: novels by Dickens and Twain, several volumes of poetry, practical guides to ranching and animal husbandry, and a well-worn Bible. On the mantel sat a daguerreotype in a silver frame showing a younger Owen in uniform standing beside a handsome black man also in Union blue. The kitchen area was basic but functional, with a cast iron stove, a dry sink, and shelves stocked with staples. Without hesitation, Abigail rolled up her sleeves and began preparing a meal from the provisions she found: beans, salt pork, cornmeal for bread, and dried apples that could be stewed for a simple dessert. When Owen returned, the cabin was filled with the aroma of cooking food and fresh cornbread. He stopped in the doorway, an expression of surprise and something like pleasure crossing his face. "You didn't have to do this," he said, removing his hat. "I wanted to," Abigail replied. "It's the least I can do to thank you for your kindness. Besides, cooking is one thing I'm actually good at." Owen washed up outside, and they sat down to the simple but satisfying meal. As they ate, he told her more about the ranch: how he'd started with just 20 head of cattle and slowly built his herd, the challenges of the harsh winters and occasional drought, his plans for expanding if the next few seasons went well. "And do you run this place entirely alone?" Abigail asked. "I have one full-time hand, Miguel Reyes. Good man, been with me since I bought the place. During roundup and branding, I hire on a few more. Miguel lives in a small cabin about a quarter-mile down the creek with his wife, Elena. You'll meet them soon enough." After they finished eating, Owen insisted on cleaning up despite Abigail's protests. "You cooked, I'll wash," he said firmly. "That's how it works here." Later, as evening settled over the valley and a chill crept into the air, Owen built a fire in the fireplace. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Abigail mending a tear in her shawl by the firelight while Owen whittled a piece of wood with a small knife, his hands sure and steady. "What will happen tomorrow?" Abigail finally asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind all day. Owen looked up from his carving. "Tomorrow, well, I need to check the north pasture, fix a section of fence that was damaged in the last storm, normal ranch work." "I meant what will happen with me," Owen set down his whittling. "That depends on what you want, Abigail. As I said, you're free to make your own choices now." "But I have nowhere to go," she reminded him. "No money, no family." "You have a safe place here for as long as you need it," Owen assured her. "And as for money, if you're willing to help around the ranch, I'll pay you a fair wage. Elena could use some help with the cooking when we have extra hands during busy seasons, and there's plenty of other work if you're interested in learning." Abigail considered his offer, It was more than generous, it was life-changing. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "And I promise I'll earn my keep." "I have no doubt of that." Owen's voice was warm. "Now you should get some rest. First day on a ranch is always the hardest, they say." As Abigail retired to her new room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Whatever the future held, she faced it now as a free woman, not as someone's daughter or property. The thought was as terrifying as it was liberating. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Abigail's life. She woke early each morning to prepare breakfast before Owen headed out to work the ranch. During the days, she took over management of the household, cleaning, cooking, mending, and gradually adding small touches that transformed the functional bachelor's cabin into something more like a home. She met Miguel and Alina Reyes, a kind couple in their 40s who immediately took her under their wing. Alina, a skilled herbalist and cook, began teaching Abigail the local plants and traditional recipes, while Miguel showed her how to tend the small vegetable garden behind the cabin that had been neglected in recent years. True to his word, Owen paid her weekly for her work. It wasn't a large sum, but to Abigail, who had never had money of her own, it represented independence. She carefully saved most of it, though occasionally she would ask Owen to bring back small necessities from his trips to the nearest trading post. For his part, Owen seemed pleased with the arrangement. He commented appreciatively on her cooking and the improvements to the cabin, and in the evenings they often sat by the fire talking until late. He taught her to play chess on a carved wooden set that had belonged to his father, and she discovered in herself an aptitude for strategy that surprised them both. Gradually, Abigail began venturing beyond the immediate confines of the homestead. Alina taught her to ride astride on a gentle mare named Daisy that Owen set aside for her use. At first, Abigail was terrified, clinging to the saddle horn and barely able to control the horse at a walk. But with practice and Alina's patient instruction, she gained confidence. One clear morning, about 6 weeks after her arrival, Abigail rode out to where Owen was mending fences in the north pasture. She arrived just as he was finishing, bringing a canteen of fresh water and a package of Alina's tamales wrapped in corn husks. Owen straightened as she approached, pushing his hat back and wiping sweat from his brow. The summer sun had deepened his tan, highlighting the blue of his eyes in contrast. "Well, look at you," he called as she dismounted with growing ease. "A regular horsewoman now." Abigail laughed, feeling a flutter in her stomach at his admiring gaze. "Hardly that, but at least I'm not terrified anymore." They shared the lunch in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, watching the cattle graze peacefully in the distance. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of a cow or the cry of a hawk circling overhead. "I've been thinking," Owen said finally. "The town's having its harvest dance next weekend. Folks come in from all the surrounding ranches. There's music, food, that sort of thing. Might be a good chance for you to meet some of the neighbors." Abigail's heart quickened at the invitation. "Are you asking me to accompany you to a dance, Mr. O'Malley?" A slight flush that had nothing to do with the heat crept up Owen's neck. "I suppose I am, Miss Zimmerman, if you'd care to go." "I'd like that very much," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite her excitement. "Though I should warn you, I haven't danced in years." "That makes two of us," Owen admitted with a grin. "We can stumble around the floor together." The prospect of the dance gave Abigail something she hadn't realized she'd been missing: a sense of anticipation, of looking forward rather than simply surviving day to day. That evening, she pulled out her 2 dresses and critically assessed them. Neither was remotely suitable for a social occasion. Alina came to her rescue, arriving the next day with a length of pretty floral calico she'd been saving. Together, the women spent the next few evenings cutting and stitching a new dress for Abigail. Alina's skillful hands guided the younger woman, teaching her techniques for creating a fitted bodice and full skirt that would be perfect for dancing. As they worked, Alina shared stories of her own courtship with Miguel, speaking in a mix of English and Spanish that Abigail was gradually learning to understand. There was a knowing gleam in the older woman's eye whenever she mentioned Owen that made Abigail blush, though she tried to insist they were merely friends. "Perhaps for now," Alina said with a gentle smile. But I see how he watches you when you are not looking, and how you watch him. He saved me, Abigail said, focusing intently on her stitching. I'm grateful, that's all. Gratitude is a good beginning, Alina replied. But it is not the same as what grows in your heart now, is it? Abigail couldn't answer, not even to herself. Her feelings for Owen had indeed developed beyond simple gratitude, but she had no framework for understanding them. The few young men she'd known in Dry Creek had been rough miners' sons with calloused hands and cruder manners. Owen was different, thoughtful, gentle despite his strength, respectful of her as a person rather than a possession. The night of the dance arrived, and Abigail dressed with nervous anticipation. The new dress fit perfectly, the blue and cream calico complementing her fair coloring. She had washed her hair with Alina's special rosemary rinse, and it hung in loose waves down her back, secured with a simple ribbon. When she emerged from her room, Owen was waiting by the fireplace, dressed in his best clothes, clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a vest that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and for a moment, Abigail struggled to breathe at the sight of him. "You look beautiful," he said softly, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." The ride to town took nearly 2 hours, but Abigail barely noticed the time passing as they talked easily about everything and nothing. The settlement was larger than Dry Creek, with proper streets and permanent buildings instead of hastily constructed miners' shacks. The dance was being held in the newly built schoolhouse, a source of pride for the growing community. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the crowded room. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and tables laden with food and drink lined the walls. Owen kept a protective hand at the small of Abigail's back as he introduced her to neighbors and friends. She was conscious of curious glances and whispered questions about the young woman who had appeared so suddenly at the O'Malley ranch, but Owen's steady presence beside her gave her confidence. When he led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, Abigail's initial nervousness faded as his hand settled at her waist, and he guided her through the steps with unexpected grace. "You dance very well for someone who claimed to be out of practice," she teased. "I may have understated my abilities slightly," Owen admitted with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Charlotte insisted I learn properly before our wedding, said she wouldn't have her husband stumbling around like a newborn colt at their first social as a married couple." It was the first time he'd mentioned Charlotte so casually, without the shadow of grief darkening his expression. Abigail took it as a good sign. "She was a wise woman," Abigail said, "and I'm the beneficiary of her foresight." The evening passed in a whirl of dances, introductions, and laughter. Abigail found herself genuinely enjoying the company of these frontier families' hardworking people, who had carved out lives in this beautiful but demanding landscape. Several of the women invited her to join their quilting circle, while others sought her opinion on recipes or household matters as if she were already an established member of their community. It was well past midnight when Owen finally suggested they start for home. Abigail agreed readily, her feet aching pleasantly from dancing and her heart full from the warmth of the evening. The ride back was quieter, both of them tired but content, the silver moonlight guiding their way across the open country. When they reached the ranch, Owen helped her down from her horse with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Standing close in the moonlight, Abigail felt the air between them change, charged with unspoken possibilities. "I had a wonderful time tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "So did I," Owen replied, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Better than any social I can remember in years." Neither of them moved for a long moment, the only sounds the soft nickering of the horses and the distant call of a night bird. Then, with gentle deliberation, Owen leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to Abigail's eyes. When they parted, he touched her cheek lightly. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "I'm glad you finally did," Abigail replied, surprising herself with her boldness. They walked hand in hand to the cabin, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. At her bedroom door, Owen kissed her once more, then bid her good night with a reluctance that warmed her through. Lying in bed later, Abigail traced her lips with her fingertips, hardly able to believe the evening's turn of events. 3 months ago, she had been a virtual prisoner in her father's home, with no prospects beyond eventual marriage to whichever of Dry Creek's aging miners might offer for her. Now she was here, in this peaceful valley, experiencing the first stirrings of what she dared to think might be love. The change in their relationship blossomed gradually over the following weeks. There were more kisses in the kitchen when Owen returned from work, by the fireplace in the evenings, in the shade of the cottonwood when they rode out together on Sundays. They spoke more openly about their pasts and their hopes for the future, building a foundation of trust and understanding. One evening in late autumn, as they sat by the fire after supper, Owen reached for her hand with unusual solemnity. "Abigail, there's something I need to ask you," he began, his voice carrying a note of nervous determination she'd never heard before. Her heart quickened. "Yes. These past months with you have been the happiest I've known since before the war. You've brought life and light back to this place and to me." He took a deep breath. "I know this might seem fast, but out here we learn not to waste time when we find something precious." He slid from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Abigail Zimmerman, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to hope for this, the reality of the moment overwhelmed her. Tears sprang to her eyes as joy bubbled up within her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Owen, I would be honored to be your wife." His face lit with a smile of pure happiness as he reached into his pocket and produced a small gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found the right woman." The ring was a simple band with a small pearl set in the center, elegant in its restraint. "It's beautiful," Abigail said, admiring how it caught the firelight, "and it fits perfectly." Owen rose and gathered her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking we could be married before winter sets in," he suggested. "The circuit preacher comes through in 3 weeks. Too soon." "Not soon enough," Abigail replied, making him laugh with delight. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Elena was the first to congratulate them, embracing Abigail with tears of joy and telling Owen in rapid-fire Spanish that it was about time he made his intentions official. Miguel slapped Owen on the back and presented them with a finely carved wooden box as an engagement gift. Preparations for the wedding occupied much of Abigail's time in the weeks that followed. With Elena's help, she transformed her blue calico dress into a wedding gown, adding lace trim from Elena's own bridal veil and tiny pearl buttons ordered specially from Denver. Owen rode to the trading post and returned with yards of white ribbon, a pair of delicate kid gloves, and a small bottle of rosewater perfume luxuries that brought tears to Abigail's eyes with their thoughtfulness. The ceremony was to be held at the ranch, followed by a celebration to which all their neighbors were invited. As the day approached, wagons arrived bearing families from miles around, each bringing food and gifts and willing hands to help with preparations. The women took over the cabin, decorating it with pine boughs and the last of the autumn flowers, while the men constructed long tables under the trees where the feast would be served. Children ran about excitedly, and the atmosphere was one of joyful anticipation. On the morning of the wedding, Elena came to help Abigail dress. As she arranged the younger woman's hair, weaving flowers into the golden waves, she spoke of marriage with the wisdom of her 20 years with Miguel. "Remember always to speak with kindness, even in anger," she advised. "And to listen not just with your ears, but with your heart. A marriage is like a garden, it requires daily tending to flourish." Abigail nodded, absorbing the older woman's words. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "Not about marrying Owen, but about being a good wife to him. I had so little example of a happy marriage after my mother died." Elena's eyes softened with understanding. "You have love, respect, and the willingness to learn. The rest will come with time." She stepped back to survey her handiwork. "There, you are ready to meet your groom." The ceremony itself was simple but deeply moving. Owen waited for her by the fireplace where they had spent so many evenings, looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit. The circuit preacher, a kindly older man who had ridden 2 days to perform the service, stood beside him. The cabin was filled with friends and neighbors, all standing as Abigail entered on Miguel's arm, the older man having offered to give her away in the absence of her father. Owen's face as he saw her for the first time in her wedding finery was something Abigail knew she would remember until her dying day, a look of such wonder and love that it nearly stole her breath. She moved toward him as if in a dream, aware only of his eyes holding hers and the future stretching before them. Their vows were the traditional ones, spoken with clear voices that carried to every corner of the room. When Owen slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his eyes shone with unshed tears that matched her own. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Owen's kiss was gentle but full of promise, mindful of their audience yet unmistakably claiming her as his wife. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and then they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations and blessings. The celebration lasted well into the night, with feasting, dancing, and stories shared around bonfires as the temperature dropped. There was music from guitars and fiddles, singing that ranged from hymns to rowdy trail songs, and enough food to feed twice their number. As the evening drew to a close, the married women gathered around Abigail for the traditional bedding ceremony, an old custom that had survived the journey west. With much giggling and good-natured teasing, they escorted her to the bedroom she would now share with Owen, helping her change from her wedding gown into a white nightdress that Alina had embroidered as a wedding gift. "Be happy, my friend," Alina whispered as she embraced Abigail one last time before shooing the other women out. "God has blessed you both with a second chance at happiness. Treasure it." Left alone, Abigail sat nervously on the edge of the bed, waiting. She didn't wait long. A soft knock preceded Owen's entrance, and the look in his eyes as he beheld her sitting there in the lamplight drove all nervousness from her mind. "You are so beautiful," he said, crossing to kneel before her, "and I can hardly believe you're my wife." "Believe it," Abigail replied, reaching out to touch his face. "I am yours and you are mine, now and always." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation to Abigail. Owen was as gentle and considerate a lover as he was a man, guiding her through the initial discomfort with patience and tenderness until they found their rhythm together in the most ancient of dances. Afterward, lying in his arms as their breathing slowed, Abigail felt a sense of rightness, of completion that she had never known was possible. "I love you, Abigail O'Malley," Owen murmured against her hair. The sound of her new name brought a smile to her lips. "And I love you, Owen O'Malley." More than I ever thought possible. Winter descended on the valley with a ferocity that surprised even the old-timers. Snow piled in drifts taller than a man, and temperatures dropped so low that the creek froze solid enough to walk across. The cattle huddled in sheltered draws, their breath steaming in the frigid air, while the horses stamped restlessly in the barn, eager for exercise that was often impossible in the deep snow. For Owen and Abigail, the harsh weather was a blessing in disguise. Forced to remain close to home, they settled into married life in the cozy confines of their cabin. They established routines and traditions, learned each other's habits and preferences, and built the foundation of their life together one day at a time. Mornings began with Owen stoking the fire while Abigail prepared breakfast. They worked together throughout the day, he tending to the livestock and maintaining equipment, she managing the household and preserving their food stores. In the evenings, they read aloud to each other from Owen's collection of books, played chess by the fireplace, or simply talked, sharing thoughts and dreams as the wind howled outside. Their physical relationship deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. Abigail discovered a passion within herself that matched Owen's, and they found joy in the intimate exploration of their love. Sometimes they made love with playful enthusiasm that left them breathless with laughter, other times with a slow tenderness that brought tears to their eyes. As winter gave way to spring, Abigail began to suspect that their union had already borne fruit. Her monthly courses, always regular as clockwork, failed to appear. Her breasts grew tender, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now made her stomach churn uncomfortably. She kept her suspicions to herself at first, not wanting to raise hopes until she was certain. By the time the first wildflowers bloomed on the hillsides, she could no longer doubt. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, she took Owen's hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "There's someone I think you should meet," she said softly. "Though they're not quite ready to make their appearance just yet." Owen's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension, and finally to a joy so intense it transformed his face. "A baby. We're having a baby," Abigail nodded, her own happiness reflected in his eyes. "Sometime in late autumn, I think. Alina suspects it might be twins, given how quickly I'm feeling changes, but it's too soon to be certain." Owen gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious porcelain. "A family," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our family." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Owen threw himself into expanding their cabin, adding a proper nursery adjacent to their bedroom. He crafted a cradle from pine with his own hands, sanding it to satin smoothness and carving delicate designs along the edges. Abigail sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket for the baby, her fingers flying with newfound urgency as her body changed to accommodate the new life within. Alina visited regularly, bringing herbal teas to ease Abigail's morning sickness and sharing wisdom from her own experience as a mother of 4. Summer passed in a golden haze of contentment. Abigail's belly grew round and firm, and the baby's movements became strong enough for Owen to feel when he placed his hand on her abdomen. They would lie together in the evenings, marveling at the tiny kicks and rolls that signaled their child's developing personality. "What shall we name him?" Owen asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her belly. "Or her, if it's a boy, I thought perhaps Michael, after your father," Abigail suggested. "And if it's a girl, maybe Charlotte." She watched his face carefully as she spoke the name. Owen's eyes softened. "You wouldn't mind using her name? She was important to you," Abigail said simply. "And without the path your life took after losing her, we might never have found each other. I think it would be a fitting tribute." He kissed her then, a kiss full of gratitude and love. "Charlotte for a girl then, but I'd like to suggest Elizabeth as a middle name after your mother." "Charlotte Elizabeth O'Malley," Abigail tested the name aloud. "It's beautiful, and for a boy." "Michael Abel," Owen said firmly, "to remember both our fathers, the good and the bad that shaped us." Abigail considered this, touched by his willingness to acknowledge her father despite everything. "Yes," she agreed finally. "We are who we are because of all that came before, aren't we?" As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler temperatures and shorter days, Abigail's time grew near. The baby had dropped lower in her abdomen, and Alina, examining her with experienced hands, confirmed that it would likely be only a matter of weeks. "Just one baby, I think," she told them with a smile, "a strong one by the feel of it." Owen grew increasingly protective, reluctant to leave Abigail alone even for short periods. He arranged for Miguel to take over more of the ranch duties and moved a young cowhand into the bunkhouse to help with the daily chores. Despite Abigail's assurances that first babies rarely arrived early, he insisted on being prepared. As it happened, his caution was well-founded. 2 weeks before Alina's estimated date, Abigail woke in the night to a sharp pain that took her breath away. When her waters broke shortly thereafter, soaking the bedsheets, there was no more doubt. "It's time," she told Owen, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear and excitement coursing through her. What followed was the longest day of both their lives. Alina arrived within the hour, bringing her midwife's supplies and calm competence. She banished Owen from the bedroom initially, setting him to boiling water and preparing clean linens while she examined Abigail. "The baby is in a good position," she assured the younger woman. "Everything is proceeding as it should." As the labor progressed and the pains intensified, Abigail found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. Owen was permitted back into the room, providing support as she walked, then kneeled. then finally took to the bed as the contractions came one after another with barely a break between. Throughout it all, his presence was her anchor. He wiped her brow with cool cloths, supported her back when she needed to change positions, murmured encouragement in her ear when she felt she couldn't continue. When she cried out that she couldn't do it anymore, it was his voice that steadied her. "You are the strongest person I know, Abigail O'Malley," he told her firmly. "You can do this. Our child is counting on you, I am counting on you, and I am right here with you every step of the way." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Alina announced that it was time to push. Abigail gathered her remaining strength, bearing down with all her might as Owen supported her shoulders and whispered prayers and encouragements in her ear. With a final, tremendous effort, their child entered the world a daughter, red-faced and indignant, with a lusty cry that filled the room and her parents' hearts with joy. "Charlotte Elizabeth," Abigail whispered as Alina placed the swaddled infant in her arms. "Welcome to the world, little one." Owen's face as he beheld his daughter for the first time was a study in wonder and adoration. "She's perfect," he breathed, gently touching the downy hair that already showed hints of her mother's golden hue. "Absolutely perfect." The first weeks of Charlotte's life passed in a blur of exhaustion and exhilaration for her parents. She proved to be a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in 3-hour stretches that allowed Abigail to recover her strength gradually. Owen was an attentive father from the start, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Charlotte against his shoulder when she was fussy. As winter once again wrapped the valley in its cold embrace, the O'Malleys settled into their new life as a family of 3. The cabin, which had once seemed so empty to Owen, now felt like the center of the universe, filled with love and the small miracles of daily life with an infant. On Christmas Eve, with Charlotte sleeping peacefully in her cradle and a pine tree decorated with popcorn strings and paper ornaments brightening the corner of their main room, Owen presented Abigail with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. They had agreed to keep their gift simple this year, with a new baby and all the expenses that entailed. "Something I've been working on," Owen replied with an enigmatic smile. "Open it." Inside the package was a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. Opening it, Abigail found the first few pages filled with Owen's neat handwriting. "The story of us," she read aloud from the title page, then looked up at him questioningly. "I started writing it the day Charlotte was born," Owen explained. "Everything I could remember about how we met, how you came to the ranch, our courtship and wedding. I thought someday she might want to know her parents' story, the real story, not some sanitized version that leaves out the hard parts." Abigail flipped through the pages, tears filling her eyes as she read snippets of their journey together seen through Owen's perspective. His account was unflinchingly honest: the ugliness of that night in the saloon, the uncertainty of their early days together, the gradual blossoming of love between them. "It's the most precious gift anyone has ever given me," she said, closing the book carefully and holding it to her heart. "Thank you. There's plenty of blank pages left," Owen said, sitting beside her on the sofa and drawing her close, "for us to fill with the rest of our story as it unfolds." "I think it's going to be a very long book," Abigail replied, leaning her head on his shoulder as they gazed at their sleeping daughter. "I certainly hope so," Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm looking forward to every single page." 5 years passed, bringing changes both to the O'Malley Ranch and to the territory around it. The railroad had finally pushed through, bringing increased settlement and prosperity. Owen's cattle operation had grown steadily, allowing them to build a larger, more comfortable home adjacent to the original cabin, which now served as a bunkhouse for their increasing number of ranch hands. Charlotte had grown into a spirited, intelligent child with her mother's golden hair and her father's blue eyes. She was joined 2 years after her birth by a brother, Michael Abel, who at 3 was already showing signs of his father's quiet determination and love of the land. On a warm summer evening, the family gathered on the wide porch of their home to watch a spectacular sunset. Charlotte sat on the porch railing, safely enclosed by her father's protective arm, while Michael played with wooden horses at their feet. Abigail, her figure showing the first subtle signs of their third child expected in the winter, leaned comfortably against Owen's side. "Mama," Charlotte said suddenly, "tell me again about how you and Papa met." It was a favorite bedtime story, though the children's version omitted certain details that would wait until they were older. Abigail exchanged a glance with Owen, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, sweetheart, I was in a bit of trouble, and your papa came along just when I needed help the most. He was very brave and very kind. Like a knight in the storybooks," Charlotte asked, her eyes wide. "Even better," Abigail assured her. "He was a cowboy on a big bay horse, and when he saw that I needed rescuing, he didn't hesitate for a moment. And did you fall in love right away?" This was always Charlotte's next question. "Not right away," Owen answered, his eyes meeting Abigail's over their daughter's head, "but very soon after. Your mama was so brave and so beautiful I couldn't help falling in love with her. And then you got married and had me." Charlotte concluded with the satisfaction of a well-known story reaching its expected conclusion. "That's right," Abigail confirmed, "and it's been the greatest adventure of our lives." Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Owen and Abigail sat together in their bedroom. The journal he had given her that first Christmas lay open between them, its pages now filled nearly halfway with their continuing story: Charlotte's birth and first steps, Michael's arrival, the building of their new home, the everyday triumphs and challenges of their life together. "Do you ever think about that night?" Owen asked quietly. In the saloon in Dry Creek, Abigail considered the question, one hand absently stroking her slightly rounded abdomen where their third child grew. "Sometimes," she admitted, "less often as the years pass. But I'll never forget it, not just the fear and humiliation, but the moment you walked in and everything changed." "I was passing through," Owen said, shaking his head slightly at the memory. "Wasn't even planning to stop in Dry Creek that night. Had a funny feeling, though, like something was pulling me toward that saloon. Divine intervention, perhaps," Abigail suggested with a soft smile, "or just extremely good luck on my part." "On both our parts," Owen corrected, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "I was just as lost as you were in my own way, just better at hiding it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. "I never thought I could be this happy," Abigail said finally. "That night in the saloon, I couldn't see any future at all, let alone one filled with so much joy." "That's the thing about the future," Owen replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "You never can tell what's waiting just over the next ridge. Sometimes it's trouble, but sometimes it's everything you never knew you needed." Abigail finished for him, turning to meet his kiss with the same tenderness that had characterized their love from the beginning, a love born in desperation, but nurtured in hope, growing stronger with each passing season of their life together. Outside their window, the stars wheeled slowly across the vast Montana sky, bearing witness to their story as it continued to unfold, page by precious page, in the book of their shared life.